Don't get me wrong. Don't look at me crazy, but I don't think that Trump is planning to leave office in 2028. Hi, my name is Dr. L, and welcome to The Breakdown. Thank you so much for checking out this episode. I really appreciate it. We're going to jump right into it. Make sure you hit the like button on your way in, subscribe, share, all that kind of good stuff. So we're going to take a look at some court rulings today. We're going to explore and explain, a few concepts that are, essential for understanding how the law enforcement should work. On this channel, I definitely try to dive into law enforcement tactics, thought processes, policies, procedures, best practices, et cetera, et cetera. So, but I wanted to talk about in this particular place and in this particular platform and in this this episode right here, I want to analyze some court rulings that just came down. One is a little bit old. Forgive me, I was away on vacation. I didn't get a chance to do it, but we're going to take a look at some of the court rulings that have come up. So, first thing is we're going to take a look at Trump's tariffs found to be illegal by U.S. Appeals Court. And I have not watched this episode yet, so we're going to look at it and dive into it here. So we're going to add this to the screen here. And here we go.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. We've got some breaking news just now on the central economic policy of this Trump administration. In a huge blow to the White House and its agenda, and a big win, I would say, for everyone else, a federal appeals court has just ruled that Trump's sprawling tariffs are unlawful and invalid. Of course, the president has been obsessed with imposing his willy-nilly tariffs on Americans. In fact, it has been the central plank of his entire economic agenda. Now, it has been wildly unpopular. It's polling underwater. It is costing consumers and corporations billions and billions of dollars a day. It's stopping the Fed from cutting interest rates by driving inflation. It has, on the whole, been really bad economic policy. And most of the discussion of these tariffs have been focused on that. But there's also something about these tariffs, which is that from the jump, they've been pretty clearly illegal. I mean, think about it for a second. Can the president just by himself create tariffs that raise hundreds of billions of dollars?
I said that the first day that this man started doing this craziness, Congress has the power to levy taxes. Why this man was allowed to do it or get away with it, I didn't see enough politicians standing up against this. So fortunately, some lawyers and some appeals court really looked into this and did their job. Somebody's got to do their job. This system is about checks and balances. That's one of the first things I try to get through people's heads when I'm teaching criminal justice. This system is about checks and balances. And yes, what is this? MSNBC, which is changing its name. I think the MSN now is, obviously not in Trump's camp. But here we go.
Zero congressional input. These tariffs are a violation of the law that they purport to use as the justification, and a violation of the spirit of the Constitution of a country which was quite literally founded on the belief the executive cannot unilaterally just impose a tax without representation, specifically tariffs. Now, the Trump administration has claimed that its tariff regime and the reciprocal tariffs that it has, and those on China and Mexico and Canada, that those are an emergency measure under a 1974 law, and that made it legal. Well, when this was challenged in a district court, the district court judge said, no way, this does not comport with the law. So the Department of Justice, acting as Trump's lawyers, appealed. And now, just 20 minutes ago, in a huge development, an appellate court has just upheld that ruling 7-4, the federal appellate circuit, saying it is illegal. All the tariffs you're citing are illegal. The emergency you claim is not a valid basis to break the law. Neil Kochel argued this case on behalf of the plaintiffs who just emerged victorious. He previously served as acting Solicitor General of the United States, and he joins me now.
I wonder what's going to happen if this goes to the U.S. Supreme Court, how this will be taken.
Neil, frame the argument that you made and what the court said about those arguments.
Yeah, so I want to begin, Chris, by saying, like you started by saying it's a blow to the President Trump. The way I really think of it is it's a win for the Constitution. And it's always, a very serious, sober thing when you challenge presidential action and something you have to do really carefully. But when we looked at this, and I'm privileged to represent a number of small businesses, we looked at it and said, look, this just is way beyond the constitutional pale. And that's what the 7 judges today said on our nation's second highest court. They looked at it and said, the president under our Constitution is given no power to impose tariffs. Our founders expressly gave that to the Congress in Article 1, Section 8. And President Trump himself recognized that last time when he was president. He went and asked Congress for the authority to tariff, and they said no. So President Trump this time around just did it on his own. And what we said is you can't do that under the laws and Constitution of the United States. And that's what I'm glad to see the court reaffirm today.
Yeah, I thought this is an interesting phrasing. This is the Federal Circuit, which is an interesting and unique appellate circuit that deals with certain jurisdictions, including international trade. They talk about the 5 executive orders that impose tariffs on, and they say unlimited duration on nearly all goods from nearly every country in the world. Which I thought was, when you put it like that, you think to yourself, yeah, that does seem like a pretty broad claim of executive authority.
Yeah, it's broad.
Who's writing these briefs? 5-year-olds?
As it could get. And I think this is one thing that the judges were concerned about, and certainly we've been thinking about, which is the Trump administration is saying they want to bring this case to the Supreme Court. And this U.S. Supreme Court for many years has been saying, in particular with respect to a lot of different President Biden's initiatives, these questions are too major for the president alone to decide. They have to be done by the Congress. And here you got something as major as it gets. The Nonpartisan Tax Foundation says that these tariffs are the largest tax increase on Americans since Bill Clinton in 1993. And yet Congress had nothing to do with them. It's just President Trump and the stroke of his pen. And that just can't be the right way to run a constitutional system.
You know,
my head got cold, so I had to go get my hat. Got my window open. Let's continue on here. Let's listen to more of this genius Trump and what he's trying to do here.
It's been interesting to cover this as we have, because so much is focused on the concrete effects. I mean, right now, if you're buying coffee, for instance, you notice that coffee has gotten very expensive. We don't grow a lot of coffee in the U.S. There's a little bit in Hawaii, but we import a huge amount of coffee. That coffee is being tariffed. So there's all sorts of effects, but the discourse didn't really talk about the legal foundation. The argument that they're making is that there's a 1974 act that allows them to declare an emergency under which they can impose these tariffs. But what's interesting about that act is it doesn't use the word tariff at all. It's entirely about sanctions on essentially countries that we have some geopolitical adversarial relationship with, right?
You're exactly right, Chris. You're doing excellent lawyering. I suspect it's in part due to your spouse, who's an amazing lawyer in her own right. But that's exactly right. The government is saying, in this case, the Trump administration is saying that in 1977, Congress passed a law that gave the president emergency economic powers. And the court today said, yeah, that's true. There's only one problem with that. That 1977 law says nothing whatsoever about tariffs. No president in the 50 years since that law was passed thought it had to do with tariffs. And as I said a moment ago, even Donald Trump didn't think it had to do with tariffs, because the first time around when he was president, he went to Congress to try and get the tariff authority that he's now asserting. And Congress said no. And I suspect, he's worried Congress would say no if he asks again, for all the reasons that you were explaining earlier.
One of the things here, and I want to read again from this decision here, that this is the sort of core of the holding. For the reasons discussed above, we discern no clear congressional authorization by IEPA, that's the 1977 law, for tariffs of the magnitude of the reciprocal tariffs and the trafficking tariffs. Reading the phrase regulate importation, which is the statutory language they're citing, to include imposing these tariffs is a wafer-thin reed on which to rest such sweeping power. How confident were you about winning this case? I mean, you obviously had the lower court on your side, but also...
Okay, I'm not going to delve too much more into that. So I just wanted to cover that just for a moment here and just speak about that. All right, so I wanted to really get into this situation with Trump, and I wanted to explain that because Trump is losing these particular lawsuits, and I really just thought that was something to really dig into. So the next thing up, we're going to look at let's see, what I want to look at. Okay, we're going to look at PBS News, and we're going to take a look at Trump is still planning to tout his authority and drive into the U.S. cities across the country using the military, as he has done in Washington, D.C., which I don't believe is correct. I know that the mayor of D.C. has come off and been highly congratulatory, conciliatory to Trump. I don't know if that's a ploy or what, but she has been saying some very nice things, appreciating the low spike involved. And let me just take a moment here to explain why my issue, my problem with what they are doing in that situation. Again, Trump has sent the National Guard, federalized National Guard, sent them into Washington, D.C., which is not a state. Therefore, constitutionally, he has the authority to do that. I did a breakdown of that already. Go back and watch that in the archive. One of the biggest problems that I have with that particular situation and him doing what he's doing is I think that he's definitely getting ready to normalize federal troops within different cities across the nation, in particular blue cities across the nation, and really, gearing us up for understanding and being inundated and normalizing federal troops all over the place in these larger cities. Nobody's saying that the crime isn't a problem in these particular places, but you got to go about it in the right way. And with ICE now being slated to be larger than the Marines as far as finances, as far as personnel, and particularly when you start including the detention centers that are supposed to be built, that situation. Then when you take a look at the possibility of federal troops being placed in different places, this goes against everything we stand for on a constitutional level. And I'm not happy about it. I'm not in favor of it. I think it's illegal, and I appreciate these lawyers who are stepping back or stepping up and going against him. Watch, we're going in. Trump vows to send troops to Chicago over objections of local leaders. This comes from PBS News. So we'll read this a little bit. President Donald Trump said Tuesday that he will direct federal law enforcement intervention to combat crime in Chicago and Baltimore, despite staunch opposition from state and local officials in both cities. Asked by reporters in the Oval Office about sending National Guard troops, I didn't even add it to the screen here. Troops to Chicago, Trump said, "We're going in," but added, "I didn't say when. I have an obligation," the president said. "This isn't a political thing." Of course it is. Everything is political. Trump has already sent the National Guard troops into Washington, D.C. and federalized the police force in the nation's capital. Most recently, he said he planned similar moves in other cities, particularly those by Democratic officials. What's this about? I would also add, according to what I've already said, normalizing this type of thing. 2028 is coming up. What's going to happen with voting, intimidation at the polls, making sure that people don't go out and vote. Already trying to eliminate mail-in voting, all this other type of stuff, right, is really unfortunate that he's continuing on this path. So I'm worried about all that voter intimidation, not allowing people to get to the polls, suppression of the vote. Suspension of the voting altogether. All the stuff that people are saying, I'm actually very concerned about it. The president praised Washington Mayor Muriel Bowser for working with federal forces, but criticized Democratic Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, who has said crime in Chicago doesn't require federal intervention. Trump said he'd love to have Pritzker call and say send in the troops, even though the governor has repeatedly said he won't be doing that. "If the governor of Illinois would call me up, I would love to do it," Trump said. "Now we're going to do it anyway. We have the right to do it." We know this man lies. There's a lady I've been following, Ann Applebaum, called this man the most corrupt politician in years, talked about how he's been enriching himself, talking about, we just spoke about the tariffs. Different countries have said, if you don't tariff us, we'll give you some benefits. Really, really great interviews that this lady has been doing. Ann Applebaum. I suggest people go over, put that in your search engine and watch a number of her interviews. Pritzker deemed Trump's comments to call him for help as unhinged. "No, I will not call the president asking him to send the troops to Chicago," he said at his downtown Chicago office. I've made that clear already. Trump also said he has an obligation to protect this country, and that includes Baltimore. Local officials have joined Democratic Mayor Governor Wes Moore in similarly opposing federal law enforcement intervention. Speaking of the deployment of federal troops, think about what he's now got troops on outside of Venezuela. Are you going to invade that country? He's talked about invading or doing some military action in Mexico with the cartels. We all know that it's a problem. I'm not justifying that, but I am justifying overreach. You need declarations of war to send by Congress to do all these operations. It's been a slippery slope ever since the 1970s, and it's time to reel this in, because if you don't, you got Trump now, who I think is a problem, but he's elder. What is he, 78, 79? You get somebody who's in their 40s or 50s doing this, doesn't want to leave office. It could be a serious problem. And you got to set the precedent now. We're going to stand up against this. Trump said his efforts in Washington have ensured it is now now a safe zone. We have no crime. Okay, so these particular statements here are just crazy, right? So again, when we talk about criminal justice, in order to fix the criminal justice problems in these countries, in these cities, you have to address mental health. You have to address the jobs. Those are the two biggest things that have to be addressed. And the third would be education. You have to address education, make sure that people are adequately being educated, so they can go to graduate from high school, go to college, go to any type of certification or licensing type of school, pass, get a certification, become a plumber, become an electrician, etc. They got to have the basic skills and education to do that. So you got to address education. You got to address mental illness, because we know something like 30 to 40% of those who are being arrested and housed in correctional facilities have some type of mental issues. So that's got to be addressed. Of course, you can't address that when you're scaling back and rolling back on healthcare, which former President Obama gave us, but now he wants to roll that back. There is no plan. There never was a plan to replace it. It's all been a lie. It's all been a lie. It's all been a lie. And so now, and then of course, the homeless situation that's going on, also mental illness it affects a large population of the homeless people, right? Some of them are vets, some of them are homeless, suffering from PTSD, all these other different issues that people who are homeless have. In addition to, they said there's something like 200,000 homeless people across the U.S. I don't believe that number at all. I think it's got to be higher. Have you ever been to Seattle? I mean, they're all over the street, right by the stadiums, right? It's just crazy. And Stephen Miller, one of Trump's aides there, advisors, Stephen Miller has been talking about we eradicated 50 homeless encampments. Okay, but what'd you do with the homeless people? Right? You have to address the core issues. That is not talked about enough in criminal justice. Those who teach, advocate, it's not talked about enough. Right? In my estimation, we got to do something to address these issues. Sending our boys over to the military, in the military, over to fight wars, spending all this money on wars, is created this home domestic problem that he now wants to bulldoze over with the military in order to solve. Invest in your infrastructure, invest in education, invest in our homeless, be it the mental health, housing, and the like, right? And of course, jobs. You got to lower these prices, have people come back. People are fed up. They're sick of what's going on, and you got to invest in these types of things in order to really address these issues that are going on here. You move the homeless people now they're not in the view, right? You can drive down the street in your limos and your fancy cars in Washington D.C., but the homeless people are still homeless, still begging, eating out of trash, whatever they're doing, right? Still suffering from mental illness, still running around here hurting each other, right? Because you haven't solved the core issues, and that's what we got to solve. That is what we have to solve. The White House announced separately Tuesday that more than 1,650 people have been arrested since the Trump administration first mobilized federal officials on August 7th. What does that mean? So they've been arrested. Now what? You're gonna tie them up in the criminal justice system? Again, how many of these people were homeless? How many of these people were suffering from mental illness? How many of these people were dealing with other issues that you have to address? This has to be addressed. And this city was really bad, Trump said. He said, "We're really proud of the federal efforts to curb crime in Washington." All right, so we're going to pull up another article here, and this is from the LA, what is this, New York Times. New York Times. LA ruling complicates Trump's threats to send more troops to send troops to more cities as Democratic cities brace for possibly military deployment. Democratic governors see in a lower court ruling the potential for legal protections. Let's read this over. I have not read this yet either. A federal judge is ruling that President Trump has been using troops illegally to perform law enforcement functions in LA will, if it stands, pose impediments to any plans Mr. Trump may have for sending the military into the streets of other cities like Chicago. Mr. Trump has made these threats in the context of his anti-crime operation in Washington, D.C., which has involved both civilian federal agents and National Guard troops under federal control. But because of District of Columbia is not a state, the federal government has greater latitude in the use of the Guard there. The Posse Comitatus Act, enacted in 1878, makes it illegal to use federal troops for domestic policing under normal circumstances. So to keep from running afoul of that, Mr. Trump would need a legal rationale for deploying troops to cities like Chicago or Baltimore or Milwaukee or Memphis. That's me saying that, not the article there. One potential model from Mr. Trump might be reasoning his administration has offered for sending troops to LA over this summer, ostensibly to protect federal agents and facilities. But on Tuesday, Judge Charles Brewer of the Federal District Court in San Francisco held that the administration has been using those troops too expansively. I want to pause. I want to pause right here to talk about this posse comitatus act, and of course, we want to address that. And what exactly is that, and when was this, right? So let's go over to. Let me remove this here. I probably got to stop screen share. Screen share here. The Posse Comitatus Act. This is from the Brennan Center. The Posse Comitatus Act explained. The Posse Comitatus Act bars federal troops from participating in civilian law enforcement except when expressly authorized by law. This 147-year-old law embodies an American tradition that sees military interference in civilian affairs as a threat to both democracy and personal liberty. However, recent events have revealed dangerous gaps in the law's coverage that Congress must address. What does the term posse comitatus mean? In British and American law, a posse comitatus is a group of people who are mobilized by the sheriff to suppress lawlessness in the county. In any classic Western film, when a lawman gathers a posse to pursue the outlaws, they are forming a posse comitatus. The Posse Comitatus Act is so named because one of the things it prohibits is using soldiers rather than civilians as a posse comitatus. Let me also talk about this when we talk about, and there's a really, really good book. It's called Loaded by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, and there's a subtitle which escapes me right now. The author's name is Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, and I think there's another author, Tom Hartman, have also addressed this, and probably some other folks have addressed this as well, talking about the Second Amendment. Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, was really about controlling the natives of this land, and we'll talk about the early establishment of this country, even probably before that. Controlling the natives of this land and catching runaway slaves. That's what it is. That's what it was, right? I've read a lot of material from the NRA, National Rifle Association. I read the materials. That's what it was, right? And again, I'm referring to my own research that I've done. I think I talked about it on this channel already, and so I'm addressing it again. This is what the term meant and what it is geared towards. So when this talks about a posse comitatus is a group of people who are mobilized by the sheriff to suppress lawlessness in a county, that's what they're talking about. We got some runaway slaves. There might be an insurrection, or the natives are gathering, and we got to go stop them before they do anything. That's what it was. So all white men of that particular time in the establishment of the U.S. Constitution, they said, here's what we're going to do. All white men can be armed. You're gonna bear arms, and we're gonna make sure that these people are suppressed. Now, some would say that, okay, well, it's supposed to be in case the government just gets too big and they want to take over and people want to fight back against the government. How's that going to work out with the government's got tanks and F-15s and et cetera? Where are we at? F-35s and F-15s, F-35s and whatnot. You're not taking over. And how'd that work on January 6th? You're not taking them out. Stop. It's a pipe dream, right? That maybe that was possible at that particular time, but the use of force and the scale of escalation is tripled. You're not going to win. You're not going to win that fight, right? What were the origins of the Posse Comitatus? It was passed in 1878 after the end of Reconstruction and a return of white supremacists to political power, both the southern states and the Congress. Through the law, Congress sought to ensure that the federal military would be used to intervene in the establishment of Jim Crow in the former Confederacy. Through the law, Congress sought to ensure that the federal military would not be used to intervene in the establishment of Jim Crow in the former Confederacy, right? So in other words, here's what happened. At the end of the Civil War, we entered into a phase called Reconstruction period, right? We're going to rebuild the country. We're going to rebuild it up from what it used to be. We're going to get it back on track and all that, right? Let me close some windows here. My thing is slowing down. So we're going to rebuild the country. Black folks who are formerly enslaved, or of course not the slaves themselves, or they formerly enslaved themselves, but free Black folks had entered into and started running for office and began to win. They were moving up, creating businesses, owning businesses, and employing white people. And white folks didn't like that, right? Think about it. Just for years or for decades, their philosophy, their state of mind, their whole being had been that white man is inherently superior to these former slaves, and they didn't like it. So we get the establishment of the Ku Klux Klan and other terrorist groups, but they couldn't do anything because the federal troops from the North were occupying the South. So in order to solve a presidential dispute, the new President Rutherford B. Hayes said, okay, we're going to withdraw, give us a compromise, and we'll withdraw the troops from the South, and you guys can run roughshod. So after that, after 1877, you get 1878 Posse Comitatus Act saying we're not going to intervene. So now you get the Ku Klux Klan and all these different groups going in here and just literally, doing all kind of crazy stuff, right? This is where we get a bunch of lynchings. This is where we get people being run out of town, run out of office, all this different type of stuff, right? And then, of course, in 1896, I believe it was, we get the real establishment of Jim Crow via the Plessy v. Ferguson law or court case, right? So all stuff we can talk about another time. Despite the anonymous origins of the law, the broader principle that the military should not be allowed to interfere in the affairs of civilian government is a core American value. It finds expression in the Constitution division of power over the military between Congress and the president, and then in the guarantees of the Third, Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment, which are in part reactions to abuses committed by the British Army against American colonists. This is so rich when we talk about the Third, Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments, all these different protections that people wanted because the British were doing all this stuff, but yet they had no problems doing this to Black folks, right? And again, this Posse Comitatus Act, which again, I'm saying originated with the ability to posse up, to fight off the natives, to posse up to fight off any type of slave rebellions in order to catch runaway slaves. That's what it was established by. But of course, what rules for thee, but not for me. Today, the Posse Comitatus Act operates as an extension of these constitutional state safeguards. Moreover, there are statutorily exceptions to the law that allow the president to use the military to suppress genuine rebellions and to enforce federal civil rights laws. Yeah, I don't, I can't see them doing that, but I definitely can see them using that to suppress rebellions. Of course, President Trump on January 6th, what did he wait 4 hours before he called anyone? Crazy. What does the Posse Comitatus Act say? Consists of just one sentence: whoever, except in cases and under circumstances expressly authorized by the Constitution or act of Congress, willfully uses any part of the Army or the Air Force as a posse comitatus or otherwise to execute the law shall be fined under this title or in prison not more than 2 years or both. Seems to me like this is an impeachable offense. In practice, this means that members of the military who are subject to the law may not participate in any civilian law enforcement unless doing so is expressly authorized by a state statute or the Constitution, which we do not have. You guys can go over there and finish reading off the rest of that. Let's see. What are the weak points? Events in 2020 and 2021 have highlighted two loopholes in the Posse Comitatus Act. The first involves the District of Columbia National Guard. Unlike all other state and territorial National Guards, the D.C. Guard is always under presidential control. Despite this, the Department of Justice has for years asserted that the D.C. Guard can operate in a non-federal militia status in which it was not covered by the Posse Comitatus Act. By this interpretation, presidents can use the D.C. Guard for law enforcement whenever they choose. And I went over that already. There was a 1976 law exception that I already read. Go back and watch that. Another weakness is the Posse Comitatus Act arises from the law that allows the National Guard to operate in Title 32 status. In Title 32 status, a middle ground between purely state operations and federalization Guard personnel are paid with the federal funds and may perform missions requested by the president, but remain under the state command and control. That means they are not subject to the Posse Comitatus Act, even though they are serving federal interests. Okay, all these different weak points here. All right, so I want to end this off, and I was going to go back over and read the rest of the article from the New York Times, but I think that we made the point here that I don't think that the president has the ability to do that. But I do want to end this off with reading something from military.com. This is supposed to be the military here, and or at least I don't even know who. It's never good to say I don't know, but military.com, who's supposed to be all about. Let me put it this way: supposed to be all about the military. And according to what we just read from the Brennan Center, they really ought to take issue with this. They really ought to be fighting back, and we need more commanders to fight back against this. Not just veterans who are out to service, but we need those in charge to say, listen, this is illegal. This is immoral. This is against the U.S. Constitution and the guiding principles that were established years ago, 147, almost 150 years. It's ridiculous. We can't do this. We're not going to do this, Mr. President. We're not going to deploy troops on American soil to fight against American citizens. We're not going to do that. All right. Trump expands cities targeted for possible military deployment to Baltimore and a spat with governor. President Donald Trump on Sunday threatened, and this is today as I'm recording this. No, this was a few days ago, August 24th. The other stuff that I read was from today as I recorded, September 2nd. So President Donald Trump on Sunday threatened to expand his military deployments to more Democratic-led cities, responding to an offer by Maryland's governor to join him on a tour of Baltimore by saying that he might instead send in the troops. His latest pledge to ramp up the military's presence in left-leaning cities came as at least some National Guard units in the nation's capital began carrying weapons over the weekend, making good on a directive issued Friday by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. An Associated Press photographer on Sunday saw members of the South Carolina National Guard outside Union Station with holstered handguns. The most recent development in Trump's extraordinary effort to override the law enforcement authority of a state and local governments came after he said he was considering Chicago and New York for troop deployments similar to what he has unleashed in the nation's capital. Thousands of National Guard and federal law enforcement officers are now patrolling the district streets, drawing sporadic protests from local residents. Are these people trained to do law enforcement? Are they trained to know what a hand-to-hand is? Drug interaction? Are they trained in the use of force and the deployment of the use of force? Tasers, canines. How much force is too much? What is excessive force? What does the Fourth Amendment say about search and seizure? Are they trained to do any of this? This is crazy. Trump made threat to Baltimore, and again, you're pushing all this to the side. And what I'm saying is going to happen is that there's going to come a point in time where it's going to come to a bursting bubble. They can talk about the arrest. They can talk about the number of carjackings has decreased by 87%. And the homicides are down. We can talk about all that, but all you're doing is building up a pressure cooker unless you address mental health, education, jobs, and homelessness. Unless you address those three core principles: education, mental health, and jobs, and give these folks something else to do, something else to believe in, something to look forward to, and relieve their mental health symptoms, negative symptoms, you are going to, all you're doing is creating a problem. You may push them out of Washington, D.C., but you're then pushing them to Baltimore. You push them to New Haven and Newark, New Jersey, or to Philadelphia, or whatever, or to Delaware. That's what you're gonna do. You're gonna push these people away, and it'll be great, but you're not solving the issue. Trump made a threat to Baltimore in a spat with Maryland Governor Wes Moore, a Democrat who has criticized Trump's unprecedented flex of federal power aimed at combating crime and homelessness in Washington, D.C. Moore last week invited Trump to visit his state to discuss public safety and walk the streets. In a Truth Social post on Sunday, Trump said Moore asked in a rather nasty and provocative tone, and then raised the specter, repeating the National Guard deployment he made in L.A. over the objections of California Governor Gavin Newsom. And what do you do about this, right? Do you stand up? Do you stand at the gates of the city and say you can't come in? We're not going to allow this in. You know, this is real. This is really, really bad. This is really bad. Westmore's record on crime is a very bad one. Unless he fudges his figures on crime like many other blue states are doing, Trump wrote, as he cited a pejorative nickname he uses frequently for calling for the California governor. But if Westmore needs help, like Gavin Newsom did in LA, I will send in the troops, which is being done here in nearby DC, and quickly clean up the crime. This man is such a child. He is such a child. He's so unprofessional. But the people love it. His MAGA base just loves that, calling people names. Moore said he invited Trump to Maryland because he seems to enjoy living in this blissful ignorance about improving crime rates in Baltimore. After a spike during the pandemic that matched nationwide trends, Baltimore's violent crime rate has fallen. The 200 homicides reported last year were down 24% from the prior year and 42% since 2021, according to city data. Between 2023 and 2024, overall violent crime was down nearly 8% and property crimes are down 20%. The president is spending all of his time talking about me, Moore said on CBS's Face the Nation on Sunday. I'm spending my time talking about the people I serve. Trump is spouting a bunch of lies about public safety in Maryland, Moore said in a fundraising email. In Washington, where Trump is surging National Guard troops and federal law enforcement officers, a patchwork of protests have popped up through the city over the weekend, while some normally bustling corners were noticeably quiet. In some of the most populated areas, residents walked by small groups of National Guardsmen, often talking among themselves. Videos of arrests and detainment circulated on social media. Trump has said Chicago and New York are most likely his next target, eliciting strong pushback from Democratic leaders in both states. The Washington Post reported Saturday that the Pentagon has spent weeks preparing for an operation in Chicago that would include National Guard troops and potentially active duty forces. Can you imagine sending active duty forces not to Venezuela, which I don't agree with, not to Ukraine, which I certainly don't want them to go, not to Iran or to stop the Gaza and whatever's going on there, but to patrol. This is crazy. Trump has repeatedly described some of the nation's largest cities run by Democrats with black mayors and majority minority populations as dangerous and filthy. Baltimore Mayor Brandon Scott is black, as is Moore. The District of Columbia and New York also have black mayors. The Reverend Al Sharpton, speaking during a religious event Sunday at Howard University in Washington, said the Guards presence in the nation's capital was not about crime. It's about profiling us, which I agree with. This is laced with bigotry and racism. And he later elaborated to reporters, not one white mayor has been designated. And I think this is a civil rights issue, a race issue, and an issue of DC's statehood. I definitely agree with DC statehood. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, Democrat, said there's no emergency warranting the deployment of National Guard troops. Donald Trump is attempting to manufacture a crisis, politicize Americans who serve in uniform, and continue abusing his power to distract from the pain he's causing families, Pritzker wrote on X. We'll continue to follow the law, stand up for sovereignty of our state, and protect Illinoisans. Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson said the city doesn't need a military occupation and would sue to block one. He said there's no communication with the White House about the military deployment. We're not going to surrender our humanity to this tyrant, Johnson said Sunday. I can tell you this, the city of Chicago has a long history of standing up to this against tyranny, resisting those who wish to undermine the interests of working people. I really wish that he would, this is, kind of a blanket story just covering it, but there's nothing in here in this particular article talking about the legality of and the idea of sending these men and women in uniform into these particular places. But I'd love to know your thoughts and your opinions. What are your thoughts and your opinion? Do you think he's breaking the Posse Comitatus Act? Do you think that he is setting us up for a grandeur of not leaving the office in 2028? He already tried to not leave in January 6th. I think this is all gearing up toward that, but between ICE and these federalized government troops all over the place. I'm not happy about it. And by the way, where are the Epstein files? Let me know your thoughts and your opinions. Hit me in the comment section. Much love and peace.